Hello again, and welcome to part 4 of Taking a Ride with No Particular Place to Go, as Chuck Berry once said. I'm just riding around, and at the moment I'm on the road between Tarago and Nerrigo. Nerrigo is about, I think, 30 odd kilometres from Tarago, and it's a small settlement. I think there's a pub there and maybe a church hall. I'm not sure if there's anything else there. And then once you leave Nerrigo, if you follow the road, it brings you out to Nowra, which is on the east coast of New South Wales. I'm going to leave you to look at the state of this road on your own and comment and observe it and see it at some points what it's like. But I am going to talk a little bit about the state of roads in this video. So as I travel along, I'm going to make a couple of turns and end up on the Windellama Road coming back into Goulburn. But I'm not going to stop and describe all of that and talk too much about that. I'm just going to talk more about roads and road funding. But before I do that, I want to ask you, if you're going to follow all the way through and listen to me all the way through, to think about things that are happening beyond Australia's doorstep at the moment, and in particular the things that are happening in the Middle East and in Israel. Now, I'm not going to try and analyse those things or take a position on those things, except to say that whatever is happening there is a human tragedy for both the Israeli people and the people who live in Gaza. But I want you to think for a moment about the possible implications of what is happening there, not the fight itself, and not the humanitarian issue, and not even the issue of the state of Israel and so forth, but think about what might happen if the other Arab oil-producing states in that area, such as Iran, Iraq and Saudi Arabia, for example, all decide to get a little bit more involved. And if they decide to punish United States, Europe and Australia for the positions that they've taken. Now, how might they do that? They might simply turn off the oil pipeline or reduce production of oil. And that is a serious problem for us. People who follow the oil market have predicted that if the situation does intensify and if things get worse there, the price of oil could go from about $83 a barrel as it is today to $150 a barrel. Now, the implications of that for Australia are that petrol would be at $3 a litre. Think about that for a moment. I'm not sure what it is that you pay for your petrol at the moment, but I imagine it's somewhere between $2.20 and $2.40, depending on what you put in your tank. And if you drive a large SUV, then it costs you an awful lot of money to fill that car up with petrol. And at $3 a litre, when we're in what the media is referring to as a cost of living crisis, where people are having trouble paying their bills and paying their mortgage and keeping their roof over their head and putting food on their table and paying their energy bills, to have to pay an extra 60 to 80 cents a litre for petrol, add on to that increasing tolls and increasing energy bills and so on, and it would be very, very difficult for some people to make ends meet. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm saying the experts who follow the market say it could happen. What I'm suggesting next is my own opinion, and one of the things that I think might happen as a result of that, if petrol did go to $3 a litre, even only for a short period of time, is that people would think more seriously and look more closely at an electric vehicle or even a plug-in hybrid as their vehicle. And I'm saying that, of course, because if you bought an electric vehicle, you of course not have to go to the petrol station ever. And if you bought a plug-in hybrid, then depending on where you drive and how often you drive, you may be able to drive around town to and from your work each day simply on the battery power and use a very small amount of petrol. So those two things become quite attractive. Now, if that were to happen, and if it were to happen in large numbers, when I say large numbers at the moment, electric vehicles apparently make up about 8% of total vehicle sales. That's up from previous years, and the size of the electric vehicle fleet is growing, but not in significant numbers at the moment. But if the numbers become much greater, then there is going to be a serious problem for government revenue. And that is because 48 cents or thereabouts of every litre of petrol, of every dollar that you spend on petrol, goes directly to the Commonwealth Government in fuel excise. At one stage, all of that money was allegedly used to fund roads. That's not the case anymore. That money goes into general revenue and is spent wherever it's needed, and money is allocated for spending on roads, but not exclusively as a result of revenue raised through the petrol excise. Now imagine a situation where people weren't buying petrol, and large numbers of people were never buying petrol because they were driving an electric vehicle. The revenue that is raised through petrol excise would decrease and decrease significantly. And that would mean that, among other things, the money available for repairing roads or building new roads and bridges and such like would be significantly decreased. Now, the Victorian government recently, or in 2021, decided that this was going to be an issue, and they thought they had found a creative solution to it. They thought what they'd do is they would introduce a electric vehicle road users tax. And how that was worked when it first was introduced is that a person who drove a full battery electric vehicle would be charged at the rate of 2.5 cents per kilometre travelled, and a person who drove a plug-in hybrid rather, would be charged the tax at a rate of 2 cents per kilometre travelled. The difference being, of course, because the hybrid people still have to buy fuel, and so they do pay fuel tax. Now, since that legislation was introduced in 2021, it's been indexed, and the 2.5 cents for full battery electric vehicles has become 2.8 cents. Now, 2.8 cents doesn't sound like very much. If you consider that everybody who buys petrol pays 48 cents out of every dollar goes to the government, 2.8 cents doesn't sound like very much. But the Victorian government based their bill, or what they would charge you, on how many kilometres they say you would travel in an average year. Most Australians travel the average Australian person travels about 33 to 36 kilometres a day, which works out about 11,500 or something like that kilometres a year. And the Victorian government, I believe, was basing their tax on 30,000 kilometres a year. Now, 30,000 kilometres a year at 2.5 cents doesn't, again, sound like very much. If you said you travelled less than that and you disputed the tax bill that they sent you, you had to take a photograph of your odometer and send it in to the authority that collected the tax, and they would then reassess your bill and adjust it accordingly if they believed that your kilometres were genuine. Now, when this tax came in, other states, including New South Wales, who'd said that they would introduce an electric vehicle tax when the electric vehicle fleet reached 30% of the fleet, or in 2027, whichever came first. West Australia had a similar plan. South Australia had a plan for an electric vehicle tax and then dropped it. But when Victoria introduced this plan, the other states all sat up and paid attention and thought, well, let's see how this works and let's see how it goes, and then we'll decide what we're going to do about it. A gentleman who lives in Victoria, whose name I think is Chris Vanderstock, and he has a YouTube channel talking about electric vehicles, he decided to challenge the tax. He decided that he didn't want to pay the tax, and that the fact that the tax was imposed upon him as an electric vehicle driver was unfair. His argument was, or one of his arguments was, I'm an electric vehicle driver and I'm trying to do the right thing. That is, I drive an electric vehicle to reduce my carbon footprint and to reduce pollution. And because of that, I'm being penalised by being taxed this 2.5 cents. So he challenged the tax in the court, and the case eventually went to the High Court. Now, for those who don't know, the High Court is the highest court in Australia, and its job is to decide, among other things, but most importantly, its job is it has a lot of functions to do with criminal law and all sorts of law, but its biggest function is to decide the constitutionality of any legislation passed by the Commonwealth Government or a state government. So in this case, the gentleman who brought the challenge argued that the tax was unconstitutional on the grounds that the states, that is all the states, New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland and so forth, do not have the right to charge a tax on the consumption of a good. And he argued the consumption of electricity was a tax. The use of electricity was a consumption, and therefore the state governments did not have the right to charge that tax. Now, I hope I've explained that part of it reasonably correctly. I'm not a lawyer, and I have no knowledge and background in constitutional law, but I saw it explained on a newspaper website today, and I think that was the gist of what the judgment was. If I have not explained it completely correctly, I don't mean to mislead anybody by doing so, but I'm happy for someone in the comments to add theirs and explain in more detail exactly what the court decided. But what the court decided, as I understand, is that they decided in this gentleman's favour and said the states do not have the capacity, the constitutional capacity or the constitutional right to charge a tax on the consumption of anything. Only the Commonwealth has that, and that's why the GST, I suspect that's the reason the GST is structured as it is, that the Commonwealth government collects the GST but distributes it all to the states. So the effect of the court's judgment, there are 7 judges on the High Court of Australia. 4 of them ruled against the tax or in favour of the person who challenged it, and 3 ruled that the tax was legal. So the majority ruled that the tax was unconstitutional and therefore the tax has to be removed. The Victorian government is investigating how they will go about refunding, or whether they'll go about refunding. I suspect they will have to. If the tax was unconstitutional, they can't hold on to money they weren't entitled to in the first place. But the Victorian government will have to refund, I think, somewhere close to $4 million that they've collected from electric vehicle users. And all the states who had a similar plan and had joined in this case to support the Victorian government will have to find another way to deal with this matter. Now, the question becomes here, if you are a road user, whether you drive an electric vehicle or any other vehicle, should you not contribute to the upkeep, maintenance, repair, and building of roads and so on? Everybody who drives a liquid fuel, that is an ICE or internal combustion engine vehicle, has to pay fuel tax, and fuel tax is supposed to go towards building and repairing roads. If you drive an electric vehicle, which is heavier and therefore is likely to do more damage to the roads, should you not have to pay in some way for the upkeep of roads? Yes, you might argue that you're doing the right thing by driving an electric vehicle and reducing your carbon footprint and reducing tailpipe emissions and so on. And the argument about the carbon that's released to build the electric car is an argument for another time. It's not to say it's not important, it's just a discussion for another time. But should you, if you are using the roads, should you not contribute to their upkeep and repair? Some people argue that even cyclists, for example, should pay a registration fee which ought to go towards maintaining of roads and cycleways and so on. Now, of course, a bicycle doesn't inflict anywhere near the damage on the roads that cars and trucks and electric vehicles do, because it's much lighter. But nevertheless, infrastructure has to be built, including things like bikeways and cycle paths and so on. If you are the driver of a liquid of a vehicle that requires liquid energy, oil-based energy of some sort, petrol or diesel, might you not reasonably say, well, hang on, I use the roads and I've got to pay petrol, I've got to pay fuel excise, and that's got to go towards maintaining the roads and repairing the roads. That bloke over there who drives a Tesla or a Aura or a MG Excite, or whatever the brand of an electric vehicle it is that you're talking about, he drives on the same roads, or she drives on the same roads, inflicts the same or more damage because their vehicle's heavier than mine, and they don't get to pay fuel tax. How is that fair? So that is a question that we need to think about and resolve. And the further question we need to think about and resolve in regard to taxation in general is to say, well, if we want our governments to provide us with services, schools, education, hospitals, roads, doctors, nurses, whatever it is that the governments do for us, state or federal, the things that they do for us or do services that they provide and so on, they provide using taxpayer funds. Now, those taxpayer funds are not a magic pudding. In other words, the revenue that they spend is based on revenue they receive from all forms of taxation, be it income tax, GST, land tax, company tax, whatever it is. You, as a citizen of Australia or a person earning an income in Australia, whether you're a citizen or not, pay tax to the government, and the government spends that money on things that they, and presumably you, in most cases agree are things that money ought to be spent on. If we want our governments to continue to provide the services that we currently have at the same level or better, and add to that more services, like we need police, we need emergency services workers, we need ambulance people, we need firefighters. The Commonwealth Government tells us we need all sorts of new toys for the military to protect us from whoever we've got to be protected from, and we're talking about extraordinary amounts of money being spent to acquire those new toys. Then the only way they can do that is through raising revenue, and raising revenue generally means by people paying their tax. What I think is that everybody should pay their fair share of tax. People who go to work who can't avoid paying tax should pay their tax, because it's paid through this. It's deducted from their salary, pay as you go, as it's called. Millionaires and billionaires should pay tax. They should pay an appropriate amount of tax on the income that they earn in Australia, and corporations that operate in Australia should also pay an appropriate amount of tax. So sometimes if you look at the state of the road and think, geez, why doesn't somebody do something about the state of this road? It could well be that the revenue isn't there at the moment, or the revenue is being spent elsewhere, and if the predicted increase in popularity of electric vehicles continues at the rate that it's continuing at, then, or that is at the moment, then we will be at a point sometime, not tomorrow and not next year, but at some point we'll be at the point where revenue raised through fuel excise is rapidly decreasing, and governments don't have the money that they had to spend on road repair and so on. So that money will have to come from somewhere else. All right, well, that's what I want to say about the state of the road. Thank you for watching and listening. I hope you've enjoyed my commentary, and I hope you'll tune in for the next episode.